Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. William Lucas. We're here at Cal State Dominguez Hills in the podcast room working with DHCV. So this is a final episode of Season 2 of Toro Time Live. We have a really special guest here today. We're joined by CSUDH President Thomas Parham for a discussion on a lot of the themes that we've covered both last semester and this semester on food and culture. President Parham, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here, and hello to everybody out there watching this podcast. It's a great opportunity, I think, for me to be able to participate both in the program as well as share some thoughts about food and culture. So glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm Haley. I'm a student here at Dominguez Hills, also one of the hosts of Toro Time Live. We've been talking about this episode all semester. We were like, okay, I hope he does it. We're kind of excited. We really want to sit down with him.
Yeah, I don't think the president would come.
I don't know. I imagine he's a very busy man. That's why we were like, oh, hopefully he has time for
Busy
us.
never stops, but, I always got time for students and for our faculty and staff. So I try to make myself available to do that. So
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for being here. Mm-hmm. So one of our first questions for you is, what does culture mean to you?
So when I think about culture, let me go back to being a psychologist for a minute. A lot of people think culture is about dress and even food, et cetera. Those are manifestations of culture. But culture at the deep structure level is a complex constellation of mores, of values, of customs and traditions that provide a general design for living and a pattern for interpreting reality. So if you want to know what people's culture is, the question you've got to interrogate is, what is their design for living? And what patterns do they use to interpret reality, right, in the context of their mores and values and customs and traditions? That's culture at the deep structure level.
Yeah.
Going deeper than that, be a psychologist for a minute. You can look at culture at the ontological level, the nature of reality, the axiological level, which is what is a value system of a people, right? You can look at it in terms of the epistemological level. The culture in academia is about scientific method, right? Although some people don't use scientific method, they use other ways to come to know. How do you come to know what is true? You have cosmological assumptions. Culture is understood with the relationship to the divine force in the universe. And then, of course, you have praxis. Culture is understood at the level of praxis, which is what is our system of human interaction. So all that are really elements of cultural tradition, I think, that we like to focus on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you breaking down culture basically from the surface level aesthetic all the way down to that deep structure, because something that I tell students all the time, something that I hope that is relayed by this program really is that culture it is all those things that people traditionally look at, but it's also embedded in behavior. It's even embedded in what feels like a natural reaction to you. Yes. And I think that everything you touched on, it encapsulates how it's so deeply ingrained that there's a point at which we can't separate who we are, like our human nature or our very specific instincts, from that whole cultural learning from the top down.
And you typically can't, even though people try sometimes. Culture is an interesting space in that culture allows us to connect to traditions and heritage. Culture allows us to connect to societal cues. Culture allows us to appreciate even the power dynamics that exist in certain situations. And so I remember go back into my academic brain, 1972. I think it was Roderick Pugh who wrote a book that was called The Psychology of the Black Experience, and he argued that there's a certain anxiety that was conditioned to blackness because of what being black in America meant back then. So every time you decided to put on your clothes and walk outside the front door of whatever domicile you were in, you were subjecting yourself to a certain level of scrutiny. And that level of anxiety, whether it was about comfort or whether it was about fear, impacted the way in which you related to and exercise, manifest your sense of culture within all those places. And so I think it impacts, even paying attention to the social cues of today.
Yeah,
For sure.
that's a really good point. So for the audience who's listening in, we do have, like, you do have an opportunity to submit questions. Haley is on her phone, so that's what she's looking at. Just so if you do have questions that you'd like us to relay to Dr. Parham, please let us know. But yeah, I think thinking about culture and all these different dimensions, I guess I'm probably skipping around on this questionnaire, but
That's
like,
fine,
what food evokes your culture? And I know it's a very loaded question, but
So for me, I come out of an African-centered tradition. So when I think about food in the context of that cultural space, food for me, I think, is inextricably linked to culture, right? And I think that's important for our students to understand. It impacts identity. It impacts tradition and heritage. It impacts social connections. It impacts even art and metaphor that you see, because lots of food is used in art. So when I think about favorite foods for me, I haven't eaten red meat or pork since I was in graduate school. That was a lot of years ago.
yeah,
So I typically eat fish and chicken. So for me, I look at those particular spaces that drive my kind of day-to-day living. But when I think about cultural traditions, when I go to something that is typically black, when I go to street festivals, the biggest one probably in this Los Angeles area is called the Taste of Soul, that is put on by the Bakewell Group at the LA Sentinel headquarters. And the Bakewell family, who are able, with the city of Los Angeles, has helped to shut down Crenshaw Boulevard in the middle of the community. And for a mile, you just have people in booths on both sides of the street, and thousands of people there. And they're all engaging in food. But again, that's cultural, because the food that's served, traditional soul food. So you always have some kind of protein, the chicken, the fish, sometimes even the pork. You have the greens that are made in a particular way. You have the yams or the sweet potatoes. You have the desserts in a particular way. So all that conjures up what you would expect to find at any festival where you would think soul food would be in that particular space. When you go to traditions like your family has, so you're home for Easter dinner, you're home for a Christmas dinner, if you celebrate, you're home for Mother's Day, Father's Day, you're home for birthdays. All those are surrounded by cultural traditions and food too. And depending on which occasion that is, you would expect there to be certain culinary delights that are associated with the people who are there, as well as what it is that you want to serve for people. And in that example, by the way, is another element, I think, of food that people sometimes forget, because food is also related to social class in terms of both its availability, its cost, but also what gets served and not served in certain places.
right.
So if you go to the neighborhood hangout and the kind of food that's there, as opposed to an exclusive party up in a high rent district of any community, the kind of food and the type of food and the way in which even the food is processed and eaten
Yep.
are very, very different. So all that plays a role.
I love that, because we're talking about food as, a lightning rod in so many ways, for social, communal, maybe ideological. Like, so many foods are tied with so much of everyday life. It's.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Sentinel. That's one of the oldest black newspapers.
Uh-huh.
I want to do some kind of like collaboration.
One of the
with them.
largest, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bakewell family is phenomenal, and they're phenomenal partners. Both Danny Bakewell Sr., Pamela Bakewell, his sister, Danny Bakewell Jr., who's now the kind of managing editor of the Sentinel. But Danny Sr., he used to run the Brotherhood Crusade. Pam, who's been instrumental in all of that kind of Bakewell organization. And Danny Sr.'s wife actually is a Toro alum.
Oh, cool.
Danny Jr. is actually on our philanthropic foundation board. So they're connected to the campus in ways and big supporters of both me and the campus. So I appreciate them.
Yeah.
But I love being at the event. So all those years I spent down in Orange County, there are different traditions we have down there, but I had missed being up in LA for these regular traditions. So every October, when the Bakewell family gets together with LA and shuts down Crenshaw Boulevard, and you can just be there to taste the soul. Our Cal State University Dominguez Hills is one of the only universities tabling at that event that have hundreds of thousands of people walking through the different booths, et cetera, that are there. There's a VIP kind of lounge, if you will, adjacent to the Sentinel that this president is always invited to. But it also has anybody who's anybody, from the mayor to county supervisors to state and congressional and senatorial leaders to, some of everybody's there. Governors and lieutenant governors. I mean, it's just a collection of people who all come together to celebrate the community and their liberation struggle that in this case is expressed through food and that festival. So it's a fabulous place.
Yeah.
And then you have other elements. I mean, that's kind of the biggest, really, one of the street fairs I know and festival that tastes the soul. But you go back into places, I think, with my own daughter. I think I was sharing with you guys that I have my oldest daughter, Tanya Hopkins, is known in the industry as the food griot. So if you pull up food griot, Griot, griot is like the storyteller, and my daughter's a food historian. So she helps me understand in lots of places how food has a relationship to culture and other pieces. So I really appreciate her. But even as a food historian, she talks about, how lots of foods that we helped prepare, that we even brought over to the New World, and then they are always subject to kind of the colonialism where people take your resources and your land and your names and claim your stuff as their own. She's a historian who helps to correct the record on that through the work that she does. And I was blessed, I think, with my youngest daughter and my wife to host the Food Network TV production, where they actually did a separate Kwanzaa show and taped all 7 episodes of Kwanzaa at my home.
Wow.
And with my daughter, curating the whole place, and my youngest daughter, who kind of executive produced it. But you can actually still find that on the media. If you put up, Food Network Kwanzaa celebration, you'll see Tanya Hopkins on there.
Yeah.
But she teaches lots of lessons about food and the industry, wine and spirits, but also what the cultural heritage of all of that is. So it's real important.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys are talking about it.
No, I'm happy to hear like the work that your daughter does.
We actually do have some questions. First question is, can you share your favorite family recipe?
I love it when questions come in where people have like a favorite as if you only have one. So, depending on the occasion, my favorite dish that my wife cooked, my wife is a world-class cook, like from scratch. So she learned from her mother and her mother from her mother. So there's intergenerational continuity when you think about food. But she cooks a stuffed flounder with crab meat that is just, And then she has broccoli, which I love, that has a Swiss cheese clam chowder sauce on it.
Yeah.
That is just to die for. So that's my favorite dish. So I love it when company comes over, because she usually brings out the favorite dishes when we do that. So if y'all ever talk to the First Lady, let her know that you heard about this famous dish she cooks. Yeah. That is a wonderful. For me, when I grew up cooking, I was raised by a single parent here in LA. So when my mother went out to work every day and we were home from school, each of us had a day to cook. So she would cook some of the main meats and proteins on Sunday when we'd eat. And then one of us would take Monday, one Tuesday, one Wednesday, one Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday would just kind of catch all grab bag days. And so we learned how to cook and wash clothes and do all that kind of stuff at an early age. So I don't know that I had a favorite, because cooking for me was more about functionality, not about, navigating, a particular meal. But as I've grown older and love that, I've done everything from, pasta dishes to quiches to, just regular food that you would typically cook and warm up every day.
Yeah.
So that's always nice. Also, it's interesting with the question when you think about liking food. By the way, I should also mention my favorite dessert, right, is apple pie.
Oh.
I go into French restaurants and Mexican restaurants. I love Mexican food too, but I go in there. You have any apple pie? I mean, just like in place doesn't have that, but that's just my favorite dessert. So
I had
those
a
are my
great
favorites right there.
Dutch apple pie last week, and it was
got
so
to
good.
have it with a little scoop of ice
Yep.
cream and
Yeah. Growing up, that was my favorite dessert too. It's really great.
Okay, I have another question. What has been your biggest challenge as a president of this institute?
So the biggest challenge I have, I think, as a president is trying to close the gap between the aspiration that I have as a leader and the real me that, hopes doesn't fall short every day as you work forward and move forward in your daily activities. I think there's no greater blessing in life, I think, next to being a parent, than being entrusted with the personal and intellectual growth and development of students. So I come to work every day salivating at the thought of making a difference in people's lives. I come as a servant leader trying to serve the campus and serve the community in ways I think that provide the broadest access to students, help expose them to the tremendous resources we have on campus, excited about their progression, and look forward to even coming up in a few weeks when we'll graduate another 4,000 students from the institution as we move forward in helping them move into that next plateau and navigate that, what I call that pathway to productivity and success. But there are challenges that are always resource related. So there are finances, there are space constraints, there are people constraints that Dominguez Hills has never had sufficient amounts of. There are challenges that relate to just the political winds and how those blow, both from the federal, state, and even local level. There are challenges that relate to just the interactions that people have. But I'll close that question by saying that when I arrived on campus back in 1985, so this is year number 7, there were 4 goals I had. Goal 1 was to look at student success and how we could continue to improve on that. Second was to examine the strategic plan. At that point, the old strategic plan was called Defining the Future 2014 to 2020. So when I came in 18, we were about to sunset a strategic plan in 2 years, and trying to decide what worked, what didn't, was it still relevant if it didn't get done, and how do we then move forward with a new one. But the third and fourth goals were perhaps the most important, which also were the biggest challenges. One is I needed to change the reputation of Cal State University Dominguez Hills to the external community and raise the expectation that the external community could have about our campus. And then the fourth goal, which is perhaps the most important, so this is me going into my role as a psychologist, I needed to use my talent and skill and leadership to unlock what I call the shackles of conceptual incarceration that kept this campus, our faculty, our staff, our students, and administration locked in the way things had always been rather than the way things might be if we just dreamed about what was possible for the institution and stopped settling for what was traditional and predictable. And so if you look at the new curriculum we have, the new accreditations we have, the new infrastructure we have, all that is about us dreaming about what's possible, but it is about what this campus deserves and what our students, faculty, and staff deserve, that we're trying to bring forward and help people have access to.
Yeah, I like that. 'Cause I know that there's a relatively like new partnership with Compton College about like bridging opportunities. Again, like this being such a university embedded in the community, like it just seems right that there are these activities trying to create new opportunities and endeavors. And I guess kind of building off of that question and your response, what does it look like right now, kind of negotiating, all the precarity that it seems like is falling from multiple levels, not just federal, but state. And when it comes to like building a campus culture, like what is it, how do you kind of tackle the issue of like the campus culture when sure those precarious things are happening, but also people say that this is traditionally a commuter school. It just seems like, at least the narrative is that it can be hard to build a campus culture here based on any of those factors.
Yeah, I sometimes hear that, but don't necessarily agree for a number of reasons. First, if we go back to where I started, which is culture is that complex constellation of mores, values, and customs, and part of what we have to do is go and interrogate what are the values and customs that we embrace every day. Even deciding to be a commuter campus is a value and cultural. One of the things I've said is that one of the secret sauce ingredients to our success has to be having students on campus longer, not shorter periods of time. So you've seen, I've tried to enhance our residence hall footprint to make sure that we had spaces for students to be able to take advantage of here on campus to make it less commuter, right? We were relocated to the Dominguez Ranch and to the city of Carson right here from the original spot up in Palos Verdes and Rolling Hills Estates into Cal State University Dominguez Hills in the city of Carson. So I love being in the city of Carson. The mayor herself, Lula Davis Holmes, is a Toro. And I love being connected to lots of folk around the community, from LA County to LA City to Compton, whose mayor, by the way, Emma Sharif, is a Toro as well. And Keith Curry, you mentioned Compton Community College, is connected to us as well with lots of partnership agreements, from everything from enrollment pieces to the Black Servant Institution elements we've just worked on, to even building or putting proposals together, I should say, to build joint residence halls to house students from both institutions. So lots of that, I think, are part and parcel of what we try to do. But all that is related to the culture. There's a level of collective survival that is built into the space. The social justice roots that we are anchored in are part of our DNA. That's cultural. Right. When you look at the faculty and the level of dedication we have, that's cultural. You've heard this president talk in multiple spaces, including on national platforms, about the fact that there are a lot of institutions, research ones in particular, who judge their worth based on selectivity ratios. Aren't we wonderful because we only admit the top 4, 5, 6% of students? What I've said is that Dominguez Hills on my watch will never judge our worth on selectivity. We will judge our worth based on how many students we can provide access to and how many lives we can transform as a result of that. That is cultural. So when people say just the way you commute to campus is or not, we don't really have a culture, I think they miss that one element and forget the whole forest instead of, just looking at that one tree. There's lots of culture here at Dominguez Hills, and I'm proud to represent the Toros.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a culture here. I think it's important that we acknowledge it and figure out ways that we can kind of build it up. So we're gonna, go on a quick break in a second. But those of you who are watching, again, feel free to drop a question in the chat. When we come back, we'll probably have time for one last question before we wrap it up. The 30 minutes has just flown by. But yeah, we'll take a break and we'll see you soon. Welcome back, everyone. So we do have a couple of questions. Haley, if you could read them from what the audience asked.
So our first question is, well, it's like a comment and a question.
Okay.
Southern California is known for its fusion from different cultures. For you, what is gained and what is lost when cultures fuse in this way?
So I agree with that. Southern California is a multicultural mecca, and it's hard to appreciate that until you go other places. Where in the Midwest or East Coast, where I've also lived, either in grad school or being a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, they're not as culturally diverse as we are, so that part is nice. What is gained is the connectedness to people across demographic boundaries that allow us to appreciate the best of our humanity and to look at the spaces and places that we dwell and interact with. What is lost sometimes are the cultural uniqueness as society tries to push people into this kind of amalgam of this melting pot thing that, you know, absorbs in. And what you want to worry about, particularly for people who are African descent, Latino, Asian, Indian, international, etc., and even some of our brothers and sisters in the white community, we want to be careful that we don't lose our own cultural heritage and sensibilities in the context of trying to be molded into this amalgam where we just become a euphemism for looking like, acting like, talking like, and walking like our European American counterpart, which is not kind of what we want to promote.
Right.
So those are the advantages and disadvantages. But there are much more advantages to that than there are disadvantages in that space. And I'm delighted to have been raised both in Southern California and Los Angeles, and to be able to celebrate that. A lot of that celebration, by the way, takes place via food. You know, when some of my Latino brothers, and it's Christmas time, you wouldn't think about Christmas. It's not like the turkey that Americans serve. the Latina mamas are serving tamales and other stuff. When you go to my Muslim brothers and sisters who sometimes don't celebrate the holidays, but there's a level of fasting that goes on. My Jewish brothers and sisters are looking at kosher meals, halal for our Muslim folk, in different times of year so food is embedded deeply in culture and religious practices and other things. And it's just about laying out there as a smorgasbord for us to be able to take advantage of and celebrate the different cultural heritages that we have and the ways that they are expressed through food.
And we have one last question from the live. Do you believe food brings people together, and why?
So included in the last question, the answer is yes, that food is about intergenerational continuity, even as we think about recipes being passed down from grandmothers and to mothers and to their own children. Food is about social interaction, and there are even social cues and rules about who gets to eat. You always feed the elders first. You have the children who sit at this table versus the adults. You have, there's social rules and cues around that. There are blessings and rituals that are given to that. Some people who pray to the Creator, whatever you call him or her. There are other people who call on the ancestors to be with them through libation. So there are cultural rituals associated with the food. All those things, I think, help to connect people in important ways. So I think it is much more of a connector than it is a divider. The one place where I do see it as a divider has really to do with access. And to the degree that there are certain people in parts of society that have access to food and culinary delights, and other people that are deprived of such, then food becomes a weapon for some folk to be able to use, and people interpret as such. But for the most part, food connects people in ways that I described earlier, and I think that's what's important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So as we wrap up this episode, is there anything that you'd like to share, any final words, maybe where people can find you?
I simply say thank you. On social media, I think that sometimes I have a chance to participate in, and sometimes my team helps me out. I'm at DH Prez, and so PREZ. I love being at the campus. I love being able to connect with folk. You can find me in the president's office or busy running around campus or taking care of lots of things that relate to the elevation of this particular campus and academic community. I'm so proud of what we do. Even being resource constrained, it's like Grandma used to say, we make a way out of no way. Mm-hmm. Dominguez Hills makes a way out of no way in so many different facets of our life here on campus. And I'm so proud of the students we produce, the lives we transform, and the impact that these students, our faculty and staff, have on both the surrounding community, the state, the nation, and indeed the world. So I'll just say, go Toros.
Go Toros. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And again, thank you so much for being willing to sit down, talk with us about culture and food.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Invite me back.
Yeah, I definitely will.
Next
year.
Me back.
So thank you all so much. That wraps season 2 of Toro Time Live. I'd like to thank DHTV for all the help that y'all have assisted us with, in addition to providing guidance for when we were out on the road doing kind of like the, more out on the road camera work. I'd like to thank Haley, Emily, all the students that helped on this, Gio, Reese, Jose. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all the chefs that helped too. And yeah, that concludes season 2. Thank you all so much, and take care. Hope you all have a good summer.